for respondents to give based on their experiences living in their particular neighborhood. And again, overall, most respondents viewed their neighborhood as a good or very good place to live. Safe, nice to walk around, that had stores that meet their needs, etc. And again, as with the overall Minneapolis rating, this citywide rating is pretty comparable to previous years and to benchmark data from other cities. Again, as with the overall Minneapolis rating, um, there are some metrics that show differences based on residential community and demographic group. So these responses are specifically to indicate how much a respondent agreed or disagreed with the statement, "My neighborhood is safe." So in this case, as you're looking at these, you can see the proportion of respondents that disagree or strongly disagree is much larger in Camden, Near North, and Phillips than that top bar, which is the city of Minneapolis overall. So those three communities in particular showed that they were more likely to disagree or strongly disagree with that statement. So this chart shows the same question, again, broken out by respondent demographic group. And you can see that there are some differences, again, based on demographics. So respondents who are African American or African born, American Indian or Native American, respondents who earned less than $50,000 last year were also more likely to show stronger disagreement with that statement. But you'll also notice that the community level results showed much more variation. Next, we'll talk about the interaction with city services and departments. So what we found in the survey is that about half of survey respondents shared that they had interacted with the city of Minneapolis government or services in one way or another in the previous 12 months before taking the survey. The departments and services that residents most often reported responding to or interacting with were 311, garbage and recycling services, elected officials, and police. We asked residents to indicate the degree to which they responded or they agreed or disagreed with each of the statements below. And what we found is that most respondents reported feeling that the city of Minneapolis operates transparently, that it operates ethically, and that residents are treated with respect and have a voice when interacting with the city. We showed this particular set of results mostly for that bottom bar because we noticed that residents were more likely to, again, disagree or strongly disagree with the statement that they can influence how decisions are made in the city of Minneapolis. When we reported these results for the City Goals Results Roundtable, there was some discussion on this particular point. And the feedback that came out is that the city is clear in valuing communication from its residents, and that residents feel that they are able to speak out about issues that are important to them, but there's less, to use the term, closing the loop, less reporting back from the city when those discussions actually resulted in change in how city decisions were made. So next, we'll talk about diversity, equity, and discrimination within the city. We did notice some substantial differences in the results to these questions by race and ethnicity and income with regard to experiences of discrimination in Minneapolis in particular. These differences that we found are especially large when comparing experiences of residents of color to experiences of white non-Hispanic residents. So this chart shows experiences of discrimination in particular areas of Minneapolis. You can see the top bar, 85% of respondents overall indicated that they had not experienced discrimination in the city of Minneapolis. When you break down by race and ethnicity, you find that nearly all, 93% of white residents indicated that they had not experienced discrimination in the past 12 months, while respondents of color and American Indian respondents reported that they experienced discriminations in areas that were much larger than the overall percentage. So to give you an example, This is actually a screenshot from the data book. So this will give you a level of detail where you can see more specifically where groups differ from the overall result. So the top part of the screenshot shows the city of Minneapolis total overall. That's at the top of the page. And then when you look at results by race and ethnicity, farther down the page, you can then kind of make a more direct comparison. So in this particular example, and the red boxes are not on the data book. Those are added here for this presentation just to illustrate overall 6% of respondents had experienced discrimination in employment and housing. When you break down by race and ethnicity, you can see that substantially more African American or African born residents, more Asian or Asian American residents reported experiencing discrimination in employment. And then more African American or African born or American Indian residents experience discrimination in housing. And particularly with housing, that represents a quarter of all respondents in those two groups. And both of those differences are 20 percentage points or more than the overall result. So, with the data book and with some of these, you can see where particular groups differ, and that might direct where you can spend resources or do more digging to find more detail. Next, we'll talk about the satisfaction with city services. The majority of respondents, reported being satisfied with city services overall, and that's fairly consistent across demographic groups, and fairly consistent with past Minneapolis surveys as well. You can see some differences in satisfaction with specific services based on residential community and respondent demographics, which we go over in more detail in the report and in the data book. But this will just give you a very high-level summary of all of the services that we asked about in the resident survey. I broke it up into 2 slides because it's quite a long list. But you'll see, first of all, that the purple bars at the very end, on the rightmost side, those show the proportion of residents who indicated that they did not use or were unaware of a particular service. So you can see with fire protection, 911 services, that there are pretty substantial numbers of residents who indicated that they didn't use those services. You can see with the blue bars that the highest level of satisfaction comes with garbage collection, recycling and composting services, quality drinking water. You can then also see with the orange and yellow portions of the bar, the services that residents were least satisfied with or showed the most dissatisfaction, I guess is another way to put it, is with police services, which is on this slide, and the quality and condition of city streets, which is on this slide here. So like I mentioned, we broke this graphic up into 2 slides so that you could see it with a little bit more detail. You can also see when you look at this data, and also when you look in the data book, that there are some substantial differences, not just in satisfaction, but also of knowledge of or use of city services. And I'll use 311 as a particular example. That was the only different place in the report where we saw a substantial difference in knowledge or use between renters and homeowners. Renters were much more likely to say that they did not use or were unaware of 311, to just give you a specific example of a place to perhaps raise more awareness of that particular service. So next I'll talk about getting information about the city, and overall, respondents reported that they both found it easy to get information about the city of Minneapolis and that it was easy to understand the information that they received from the city. And again, that was fairly consistent between demographic groups and also between different residential communities. Where we saw differences was in the mode or how residents received that information about the city. This graph gives you an idea of, in the past 12 months, how overall residents got their information or news about the city of Minneapolis. And you'll see that the second bar down is the city of Minneapolis website. So about half of respondents said that they used the website to get information. When we looked by resident respondent demographic groups, we saw that more affluent respondents were more likely to report going to their neighborhood associations for information. We also noted that communities of color were more likely to report going to a cultural or community-based organization for their information than this overall graph would suggest. We also noted that about 1 in 10 respondents reported that they did not have access to the internet at home, which also kind of indicates some of that digital divide that Don Joseph mentioned earlier in the presentation, and also impacts, access to things like the city website or social media as a source of information. So next we'll talk about housing. Housing emerged as one concern from the overall city survey. Overall, respondents in all communities gave lower ratings on the availability of high-quality, affordable housing for all residents compared to other amenities that we asked about in the survey. So as you can see in this comparative chart, overall you can see that there's a larger proportion of residents that rated the city on having high-quality, affordable housing choices for all residents. Again, with the green and orange parts of the bar. You can also see that there are some communities that had a larger proportion of those fair and poor responses, particularly Camden. You can also see some differences here based on respondent demographic group. So American Indian and Native American respondents, respondents who earned less than $35,000 a year showed lower ratings on this particular metric. So I will turn it over to Don Joseph to wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Nicole and Stephanie. For next steps in the process, which is still ongoing, the NCR department will be meeting with the city coordinators department tomorrow, as well as Wilder and the results team to discuss how we can integrate some of the results from the resident survey into city department activities, whether they're budgetary or programmatic in nature. So just to let you know, this is very much something that is still ongoing and that we're going to fine tune as we move forward. So that concludes our presentation, and we are available to the committee of the whole to field any questions it may have.
Great, thank you. Committee members, do we have any questions? Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. I do, and I really appreciate this wealth of information. I just have a question a little bit about how to interpret it. I was trying to dig into the data book. Well, first of all, I was also trying to look at the total numbers, and I was very curious about how representative our sample is of the actual population breakdown of the city. And it looked like overall, when we had our summaries and we were talking about gender and ethnicity, I think about 2/3 of the respondents in total were white, which is a little bit higher than what we think of as the city as being more 60, and this is, we're basing it on census data and information, and we really don't, of course, babies are born all the time. We don't really know. People pass away and people move, but 60% is the number that I carry of whites and 40% people of color, so the survey is already a little bit skewed. And then when I was digging into the data book, I was looking at a lot of the results, and the raw numbers of people who actually responded were even less than that. If you look at the data book, it's much less, it appears, for most of the questions than 40% of people of color who are responding, and Native Americans, it seemed to be 21 consistently. So were people just not answering some of the questions, or can you help me understand that better?
Chair Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, thank you for that question. So with surveys in general, and in particular large population surveys, there are particular populations that are less likely to respond overall, which is why we engaged in statistical weighting to kind of bring those numbers to be more comparable to the city of Minneapolis. And that's a fairly common technique that's done in statistical modeling and statistical data analysis. So when you're looking at the raw numbers of respondents, that takes that into account. Some respondents may answer most of the survey. Some respondents are directed through and skip particular questions based on their responses to earlier questions. One good example of that is the discrimination question. So there's one broad question that asked if a resident had experienced discrimination in the last 12 months. If they responded yes, anything other than I have not experienced discrimination in the city of Minneapolis, all of those respondents who indicated something other than I have not were then directed on to answer those more detailed questions. So when you see some of those skips, that's when some of those the responses to those next questions will drop a bit, because not everyone was then directed to answer those follow-up questions.
So in the general section of who are the survey respondents, and you talk about the percentage by age and gender, race and ethnicity, those percentages aren't weighted. That's just the percentage of the respondents, a raw number, correct?
Sorry, I'm asking Nicole for
That's
clarification.
fine.
Those are weighted.
Those are weighted.
Mhm.
Okay, so if we actually want to know the raw number of respondents, we're better off going into the data book where you have a column for everything which says number of respondents unweighted.
So you can see, yes, the number of respondents unweighted who responded to that particular question overall.
Okay, so the reason why we weight the responses is because we have so few of them.
I wouldn't say that. I would say the reason why we weight the responses is because we know that certain populations are more likely to respond, and we don't want to give more weight to someone who is more willing to take a survey than someone who isn't, if that makes sense.
That seemed to be the backwards thing to what I said. So you were
But
agreeing
it's-
with me. So we have, because we have so many respondents
Mhm.
who are perhaps making more money, or white respondents,
Mhm.
we will weight the people of color or the low-income people's answers a little bit more.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's a fine strategy. I'm not an expert in the surveys, but I think then it's a little misleading when we say about half of the survey respondents identified as male and the other half identified as female, if they're weighted. So it's a little confusing. So I just want to understand what I'm reading and what I'm dealing with, and perhaps the gender one didn't have to be weighted. I'm not sure, although it looks like on the raw numbers we actually got more female respondents than we did males. So I think we significantly more. And of course, I really appreciate all the extra effort and the work that went into getting more respondents. I think we did a better job, and we have a better sample, and geographically it's dispersed nicely throughout the city, and I really appreciate that. I do worry about the small sample size, and sometimes I wonder what we could do to get more people engaged and involved and more information about this. I've even thought maybe we could have a parallel survey that's an opt-in survey, because there's very little council members can do to drive respondents either, and we all want to help. We'd like to get all 1,000 that you asked to respond and do whatever we can to do that, because the more information, I think, the better. I can't really speak for all my colleagues, but just in general, I think that's what we want. But it's difficult when you're dealing with your samples, and so it's hard to promote that. I also understand if we just opened it up to an opt-in and let everybody who wanted to fill in the online survey, that would have to be a firewall between that bucket and the bucket we're trying to deal with for this real information here, which is very interesting and it's very concerning. And I hope we have confidence in using it as we're working on our comp plan and other department plans to really hone in on this, because I think it does reveal some pretty concerning things about disparities in the city. And that wasn't a question, but you can respond if you want.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Any additional discussion? Questions, any discussion? Not seeing any. Thank you for the presentation. Personally, I think there's some striking numbers in there that show some areas where we have room for improvement and some additional work to do, and hopefully we'll make progress on that and see it in our next survey results. So thank you very much for being here. With that, we'll go ahead and move to receive and file the 2016 resident survey. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, the motion carries. With that, we'll move on to our reports of committee. Our first committee is the Community Development and Regulatory Services Committee, and I will turn to Chair Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are 18 items that are coming forward for the council meeting on Friday. Item number 1 is a land sale, as is 2 and 3. 4 is a license for Penny's Coffee. 5 is a rejection, actually adopting the administrative hearing officer's finding with regard to a license application for Bond to Bowls. 6 are the regular business gambling license applications. 7 are business license operating conditions. 8 is a change in our low-income housing tax credit reservation award. This is Aon voluntarily relinquishing some tax credits so that YouthLink can move forward and close this year and get under construction. Item number 9 is a change to the Seward Towers bond agreements. Item 10 are the facade improvement grant contracts. I'll note Lindale, Lake Street Council, Seward Redesign, Southwest Business Association, and the Standish Erickson neighborhood are all getting Great Street grants. Item 11 is granting exclusive development rights with an organization called Build Wealth MN for the development of single-family homes in North Minneapolis. 12 are the guidelines for the infill housing new construction program that passed last time around. 13 is accepting grants from the Met Council for Livable Communities. Item 14 is accepting grants from Minnesota Housing for the vacant housing recycling program. 15 is accepting funds from the Brooklyn Bridge Alliance for step-up technical assistance. 16 is accepting funds from Employ Milwaukee for employment and training services. 17 is a rental license statement, reinstatement. 18 is a contract with traffic management for traffic around the TCF Bank Stadium. With that, I'll happily answer questions on items 1 through 18.
Are there any questions for Councilmember Goodman? Not seeing any. Thank you for the report. Now our Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee report by Chair Gordon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The Health, Environment, and Community Engagement was bringing only 3 items forward for approval. The first 2 are the last 2 Phase 2 NRP action plans. The first is Nicollet Island East Bank, and the second is the West Calhoun. We're moving those forward for council approval. And the third item is authorizing the Finance and Property Services and Neighborhood Community Relations Department to allow neighborhood organizations to contract up to their 100% of their approved NRP Phase 2 fund allocations, basically restoring Phase 2 neighborhood funds to the approved NRP neighborhood action plans. This is a fairly significant action that will actually transfer at least this year, $3,390,000 of revenues from the Consolidated Tax Increment Finance District into the NRP fund. I'm happy to take questions on any of those matters.
Any questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Moving on to intergovernmental relations with that committee's Vice Chair, Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, we had a significant conversation about the President's executive orders. So today on our agenda for approval is the 2 items. The first item is the 2017 City Policy Positions and Legislative Agenda, that is approving additional amendments to the City of Minneapolis's 2017 State Legislative Policy Positions. And number 2, it is to approve immigration enforcement and refugee, a presentation on the immigration enforcement and refugee executive orders by the President. There's 2 items under that. One is a passage of a resolution condemning the January 2017 presidential executive orders on immigration and refugees. And then item number 2 under that is approving a staff directive to establish a sanctuary city task force, also to direct the city coordinator's office to continue to work with the Minneapolis Foundation and other funders to help create a local immigration legal defense fund, and then to direct our city attorney in cooperation with the mayor to review the President's January 2017 executive orders for the purpose of potential litigation and defense strategies to protect the rights of the city of Minneapolis and its residents. I'd be happy to take questions or move forward for approval.
Any questions or discussion on those items? Not seeing any. Thank you, Councilmember Cano. Moving to the Transportation and Public Works Committee with the Chair, Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The committee will be forwarding 12 items for full council approval.
Item 1 is the Downtown Business Improvement Special Service District. It's a code amendment for the petitioning requirement for that group. Item 2 is a residential recycling grant agreement with Hennepin County. Item 3 is request for proposals for the mattress collection and recycling services. Item 4 is a street easement deed with Hennepin County Housing and Redevelopment Authority for a portion of 2225 Lake Street East. Item 5 is an agreement with the City of Edina for 54th Street West reconstruction project infrastructure. Item 6 is an agreement with Urian Construction Company for Nicollet Mall art restoration and reinstallation. Item 7 is a contract memo with Skirum Studio, also for the Nicollet Mall art project. And the remaining items are all contract amendments and bid approvals for standard work of the department. I'll stand for questions for any item.
Any questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, Councilmember Reich. Moving on to Ways and Means report with Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you very much. The first 4 items on the Ways and Means agenda for Friday will be for legal settlements. Item number 5 is an agreement for Your Cause software. That's to support the Workplace Giving project. Item number 6 is a Creative City Challenge Temporary Public Art Commission authorizing a 6-month lease. Item number 7 is a gift acceptance from the Clear Channel Outdoor for the display time. 8 is a contract amendment with Ebert for the Hamilton School renovation project. 9 is a bid for the Convention Center's wall sconce replacement project. Item number 10 is the contract amendment with Sierra Cedar for enterprise land management system training. We also have a contract with Geocom for police department mapping services. 12 is a 2017 National Forensic Sciences Improvement Grant acceptance for the crime lab training. Item 13 is joint powers agreement with Minneapolis Police Department, Department of Public Safety, and the BCA to conduct state and federal fingerprint-based background checks. And number 14 is the North Metro I-35W corridor joint powers agreement. Happy to answer any questions on those 14 items.
Are there any questions for Chair Quincy? Not seeing any. Thank you. Moving on to our zoning and planning report with Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 2 items to cycle from zoning and planning. Item number 1 is approving reappointments to the Zoning Board of Adjustment for 3 individuals. And item number 2 is approving a rezoning at 110 Russell Avenue North. I can answer any questions.
Any questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, council members. With that, our meeting is adjourned.